First of all, I'd like to thank the LTI KOREA for inviting me. It's truly a great honor to be included in this group of prominent writers. Secondly, I wish to apologize for not speaking Korean. I was born Korean, but grew up as a Swede. I must also confess that being invited to and participating in these kinds of Korean events always evoke ambivalence in me. It reminds me of my difficulties when growing up in knowing how to approach and deal with my origin and how people in the surrounding communities in both Sweden and Korea regard me. I was born in the early winter of 1970, left by unknown birth parents and fortunately found by police in Busan, was brought to Seoul and soon became adopted by a Swedish family. I arrived in Sweden as an infant in June 1970 and grew up in a typical middle-class suburb of Stockholm together with an elder brother and an elder sister, also adopted from Korea, though they are not my biological siblings. I was adopted into a culture quite different from the Korean. In those days, parents of adoptees rarely had to travel to the child's country of origin when adoption was about to take place, but instead the children were brought to Sweden, and in my case, to the Arlanda airport in Stockholm, escorted by an SAS stewardess. So my parents had only to go to the airport to pick me up, so to speak. It may sound remarkable nowadays, and yes, I myself grew up with an awkward feeling about the whole handover thing, but eventually came to terms with it, and nowadays I think of it as a literal delivery, but also a symbolic delivery. In a sense, I was born that day. In those days, Korea was also a quite unfamiliar country for most Swedes. Apart from the Korean War and the tension between North and South, Swedes in general knew very little about Korea. Hardly any news about Korea reached Sweden, and not much were known about the Korean society or culture, or the people for that matter. My parents tried their very best to give us children an upbringing, not forgetting or neglecting our Korean origin. But I think it was difficult for them. They didn't have much to go on. You didn't have any proper access to Korean culture in Sweden back then. Actually, my first childhood memory of East Asian culture was a guest performance by Chinese acrobats in the mid-1970s. And during the 80s and 90s, I remember seeing several famous feature films by Japanese Akira Kurosawa. But Korean culture? No, nothing. Korean food is quite popular in Sweden today, but during my childhood there was one single Korean restaurant in Stockholm, as far as I know, and as far as I can remember, my family never went there. Instead, we visited some of all the Chinese restaurants in Stockholm. So, my early memories of Korean culture are that there aren't any, just Chinese and Japanese. And back then, no offense, but Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, well, it all roughly seemed to be almost the same thing. We just didn't know better. But things have changed. The world is in many ways a different place than when I grew up. World development, globalization, the digital revolution have changed the conditions for knowledge and access. And of course, the prosperous development in Korea has given the rest of the world everything from technology to popular culture. Two major sports events have surely contributed in establishing Korea as more than a country of war and division. The Olympic Games in 1988 and the World Cup in 2002. And international feature film successes as the early 21st century, such as Old Boy by sorry about the pronunciation, Park Chan-wook, and Three Iron by Kim Ki-duk, And naturally, later internet memes such as Gangnam Style and mukbang, which is very popular in Sweden, have also contributed in a growing interest in Korean society and culture around the world. Ever since I was a child, people's questions, statements, and judgments have made me aware of all the different expectations due to my background history, ethnically, nationally, and culturally, and even emotionally. How should I feel and think about, how I should feel and think about being adopted, about Korea, about Sweden. I have a strong conviction that every child needs a family, or at least one parent who loves and cherishes them, wherever they live in the world. I never felt I missed Korea because I had no concept of what Korea really was. And I had a loving family, friends, and a language, culture, a connection, and a context. I was Swedish and not. At the same time, I myself didn't feel any genuine connection with Korea. I had nothing to go on apart from my birthplace and ethnicity. And somehow, that wasn't enough to give me a feeling of Korean belongingness. I felt as if I had never been in Korea. Although I was born there, or here, it was a place so very far away, a country on the map, basically completely unknown to me. It made me uncertain, insecure, and very confused about my identity and my approach to Korea. Also, the theme, the title of this symposium suggests an expectation, Korean literature and culture I met, which was the original title of this session. Now they've changed it into Korean literature and culture seen from without. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't expected to have experiences of Korean literature and culture. But don't misunderstand me. I'm not criticizing the symposium. I'm merely describing the thoughts it evokes in me. During the past decades, adult Korean adoptees from different European countries and the US have raised their voices, questioning and criticizing international and interracial adoptions from Korea. Some of them bear witness of sadness and loss, of disappointment and anger, of being deprived their Korean heritage. Obviously, we need to acknowledge their sorrow, pain, and suffering, and ask ourselves, what is the cause of their feelings? Why do they have these experiences? Why do they feel that they haven't received the support and help they've needed? I believe I can understand their need of belongingness, because obviously, I was also in need of feeling connected with Korea when growing up. Korea was both nothing and everything. Nothing I knew anything about, and everything that categorized my life and identity for myself and for others. However, I never felt deprived of a country or a culture or even a family, because I've always felt I had all of that, but in Sweden. My first real encounter with Korean culture came much later in life, in 1995, when I made my first journey to Korea while writing my first book, which is in Swedish is Blod är tjockare än vatten. I really made an effort to try to get an idea of Korean society and culture, both historical and contemporary. I visited museums and palaces, temples, and the Korean folk village. I took long walks in the alleys and streets, made excursions, and tried to imbibe as much as I could of the atmosphere, the environment, the people, the smells. But of course, it only gave me a glimpse of Korea, though a very important one, because it finally gave me what I had lacked, my own memories of Korea. After my first book had been published, I was suddenly included in a Korean community. I was invited to Korean events, both in Sweden and in Korea, and not least, I was included in a community of writers with Korean origin, like this. One of the first contemporary Korean books translated into Swedish was a poetry collection by Cho Bong-hwa in 1993, Dröm. means dream. But the first I came across was Portrait of My Youth by Jim Unjol, in Swedish, Ett ungdomsporträtt. Since then, several Korean books have been translated into Swedish, such as poems by Ko Eun, Kim Yan-sik, novels by Wang Sok-yong, Kim Yong-ha, and Park Won-sun, and collections of short stories by Kim Yoo-yong, to mention some of them. And sorry about the pronunciation. I've met several Korean writers, both here in Korea and in Sweden. I've been to numerous Korean concerts, feature films, and cultural events, both in Korea and Sweden. The Korean embassy in Stockholm also makes a great effort in giving the Swedish audience the opportunity to get to know Korean society and culture, and arranging and supporting Korean events and festivals. I try to take part of it as much as I can. Although I believe I've seen more than a glimpse of it today, I still know very little about Korean literature and culture. What I do know is that I wouldn't be able to take part of any of these Korean books without the translation support of the LTI KOREA. Translations are vital for all literature from languages like Korean and Swedish, and being able to read Korean literature in your own language, in my case in Swedish, is perhaps not vital, but it provides an extra dimension. Reading translations of Korean literature into English or French wouldn't be the same thing for me, because it adds an extra layer of language barrier. So what are my impressions of Korean contemporary literature translated into Swedish? In short, basically, literature is international, and Korean literary composition and style doesn't differ much from other literature. Subjects, environments, and certain social and cultural aspects may differ, of course, but in general, it's easy to relate to. But perhaps this impression is also due to the choice of literature passing the eye of the needle of the Swedish publishing houses. I suppose they wouldn't publish anything they didn't expect would find Swedish readers, thus choosing literature they expect a Swedish audience can relate to. In any case, literature is nothing without the individuals who create it, the writers. The strongest and most important impression of Korean literature have been the actual meetings with other writers and the connection I feel with them, and you. Not so much in terms of ethnic origin, but above all when it comes to the life choice and need and driving force to be an author. I believe there is a certain mutual understanding between writers, since the act of writing, whether you write fiction or poetry, the act of writing is the same. Whether you're Korean or Swedish, you write. You think. You wonder about relations and conditions of human beings, of life, of the world. You observe. You spy. You eavesdrop. You wander through your mind. You use your imagination, your empathy, your ability to transmit your thoughts and observations to written words, to composition, to characters, to stories, to create your own fictional spheres. The absorption, engagement, and presence in the writing act is something every writer lives with. It's the same sensation, wherever you were born or live. It goes beyond language. Younger generations of Swedes are familiar to the Korean contemporary culture in a completely different and much richer way than when I grew up. Korea has become more than just another country on the map in the Far East. I'm the mother of a 20-year-old son. His father is Swedish, but through me, my son naturally also has a Korean heritage. So as a parent, I tried to give him a connection with Korea, and during his childhood, I could do exactly what my parents had tried to, but never were able to. I could open the door to Korea. So I took him to Korean cultural events, restaurants, feature films. I also made a journey to Korea with him. I even tried to make him interested in taekwondo, but I failed. And I'll never forget when I took him to see a Korean tea ceremony in Stockholm, how extremely slow they moved and how long drawn out it all seemed, really testing our patience. But nowadays, we are still joking about the slow motion movements. Sorry, I don't mean to be impolite. I probably exaggerated my desire to give him an insight into Korean society and culture, but I've always claimed that I don't want my son to confront me one day in the future and accuse me of depriving him his Korean heritage. Me and my son, we are both of Korean origin, we are both Swedes, and there's no contradiction in this statement. I've come to understand that, and I am proud of both of my roots. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다. 그 아스트리드 선생의 발표는 아주 명료한 문장으로 진술이 되고 자신의 체험을 아주 적절하게 나타내 주셨는데 말씀 중에 인상적인 것은 그 피는 물보다 진하다라는 작품 제목, 그리고 한국은 나에게 아무것도 아니지만 모든 것이다, 이 상반된 어법 속에 저분의 문학과 삶의 정체성이 있지 않나 이런 생각을 합니다. 발표자분께서 질문하실 거 있으면 질문하시죠. 없으세요?
제가 좀 한마디 할까요?
네, 간결하게. 네.
예, 일단 제 발언에 질문 주셨기 때문에 저도 한마디 드릴까 합니다. 그 아까 우리 이 선생님도 갖고 한데 아까 그 우리라는 개념에서 그 문학으로 표현되기 때문에 우리라는 그 문학에서 우리가 하나로 될 수 있는 가능성을 열어준다는 겁니다. 그러니까 아까처럼 우리가 지금 우리말로 하는 한국 문학이든지 그 조선 문학이든지 중국 조선 문학도 우리 문학이고, 지금 하신 말씀 중에서 최동 선생님 다시 공부했지만은 흐르는 피 때문에 그것도 역시 우리 문학입니다. 그러니까 우리 글로 쓰는 것도 우리 문학이고 우리 피가 흐르는 작가가 쓴 문학도 우리 문학이라는 겁니다. 이러면 우리 문학이 점점 더 넓어지고 토가 넓어지고 기회도 너무 많아질 것 같습니다. 그런 부분에서 우리는 서로가 이런 오늘 플랫폼이죠. 여기에서 우리가 또 만나가지고 또 더 좋은 다음의 목적지로 갈 수 있는 그런 그 방향이 설 것 같습니다. 고맙습니다.
네, 우리 문학의 개념을 그러니까 한국어 한글만이 아니라 한국계 스웨덴 작가가 스웨덴어로 써도 그것도 우리 문학 속에 포함시키고 싶다 이렇게 말씀하셨는데
그래요.
혹시 더 하실 말씀이 있으십니까? 제 말이 전달이 안 됐나요?
Yes, this really evokes so many thoughts and emotions. So I have to make an effort to try to express myself thoroughly. I don't want to give you the impression that I regard myself and other adoptees as unique in comparison to you, but I think I need to explain that my experiences and are different from yours. I grew up in a Swedish family. You grew up in China and you grew up in Hawaii, different countries, but with a Korean family and a direct link to Korea. So for you to talk about our literature, it sounds so natural, and of course it sounds so open and generous, and to be included in this community is a wonderful, truly wonderful thing. But at the same time, it makes me sad. It makes me sad because I still feel like an outsider. And in Sweden, we don't have the same concept of bloodline. The thing was the title of my book. It's a saying. You know, you say like blood is thicker than water, and everyone knows what it means. It means it's the last page of the book is about this. The title of the book, because it means that, well, wherever you are, if you have the same bloodline, you will always be friends, and you will always defend each other and your brothers and sisters. And in my family, there aren't any bloodlines. My siblings are Koreans, were born in Korea. We're not biological siblings, and our family is constituted by the lack of bloodline. But what we have is love. So the book ends with the sentence, blood may be thicker than water, but love is thicker than blood. So this is really the important concept for me when it comes to Korean, Swedish identity. It's things that are so natural for you aren't natural for me. And I'm very, very proud. I don't think I can fully express how proud and honored I am to be included in your community, but I have difficulties feeling and saying that I am really, in my heart, part of this, our community. It's still like, but it's your community. You can, it's so obvious. I'm so bad at not showing my emotions, but you can feel how confused this makes me. Am I?
네.
Yes, and you say I am, and it's
알겠습니다.
wonderful and it's beautiful, but I don't have that sensation. It's still like you're including me, but I'm not ready to go into your sphere. I know I'm welcome, and I love you for it, but still, yes, I'm still the alien here.
알겠습니다. 네, 박수 한번 쳐드리죠. 네.